Hey guys, tonight we slip into a pair of rough, itchy wool pants and step into the sandals of someone no one wants to be. A medieval torturer. You're not some dark sorcerer or edgy villain, you're just a guy. Or maybe a woman in rare cases. Either way, you've got a job that stinks, figuratively and literally. The pay is laughable, the tools are horrifying, and people avoid your gaze like you're contagious. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up in a damp stone cell. Well, technically it's your workshop, but it feels more like the inside of a crypt someone forgot to bury you in. Light barely filters in through a barred window. Outside, you can hear chickens, a blacksmith hammering, and someone yelling about stolen turnips. Inside, just the creak of leather straps, the stale stench of sweat, and that one rat you named Oswald. He's back again, chewing something that looks suspiciously like a toe. Congratulations! You are the official torturer of this forgettable little medieval town. No, not knight, not baker, not bard. Torturer. The one job even the town drunk won't touch. You didn't exactly apply for this gig. Maybe you were a soldier who got too good at extracting information. Maybe someone in power owed your uncle a favour. Or maybe, and this is surprisingly common, you were just too weird to work anywhere else. People already thought you were creepy. Might as well lean in. Your new workspace is a converted cellar under the courthouse/tavern. You've got a brazier full of coals, a rack that creaks in the wind, a wheel that looks suspiciously like the one from the mill, and a set of pliers that haven't been cleaned since the last plague. There's no formal training, no Torture 101. Just a nod from the magistrate and a basket of iron implements that scream figure it out. It's not glamorous. There's no uniform, no heraldry, no sword. Just an apron made from the hide of some very unfortunate cow and your own increasingly haunted eyes. Right away, you learn rule 1. Everyone lies. The accused lies. The accuser lies. The witnesses lie because they're scared. The priest lies because he's political. Your job? Make people tell the truth, which usually means whatever the lord of the manor wants to hear. And truth hurts. Literally. But don't go thinking you're some free agent of justice. You're not. You're a tool. A bloody, smelly, overused tool in the toolbox of medieval bureaucracy. And not even a shiny one. More like a rusted wrench in the bottom of a drawer no one wants to open. The first time they bring you a heretic, you hesitate. He looks like a farmer. He smells like sheep. He sobs and swears he's innocent, and you almost believe him. But the guard shrugs and tells you to get on with it. There's a schedule to keep. There's a trial at dawn and a hanging by noon. So, you start cranking the rack, slowly, and he starts screaming. You think, this can't be right. 7s, but you keep going. Because here's the medieval twist. Pain is considered proof. The more someone screams, the more clearly they're purging sin. It's not about guilt or innocence. It's about spectacle. You're not just torturing a person, you're entertaining a town. And they do show up to watch. Not always in your dungeon, but word gets out. Did you hear? The torturer cracked another one. You're like a gruesome one-man play. A human reminder that the system works. As long as someone suffers. And you suffer too. Every time. You start sleeping less. You start drinking more. You imagine faces in the smoke of your forge. You flinch at your own reflection in a basin. Once, a kid peeks down through the grate in the ceiling and sees you at work. You lock eyes. He screams and runs. You laugh, but it's hollow. Here's the thing no one tells you. Being around this much pain changes you. You start to feel nothing, or too much, sometimes both in the same day. Historians still argue whether torturers were sadists, sociopaths, or just desperate men caught in a system that chewed up everyone eventually. The truth probably lies somewhere messy in between. You have no guild, no union, no one checks on your mental health. If you die on the job, and many do, they'll just promote the next unlucky soul. No plaque, no pension. Maybe Oswald the rat mourns you. Probably not. And don't expect the church to save you. Officially, the Inquisition hires torturers but won't acknowledge them in writing. You're a necessary evil, which is church speak for, we'll pretend you don't exist as long as you get results. 7s. Fun fringe fact. In some regions, torturers weren't allowed to live within town walls. Their houses were built just outside the gates, like medieval quarantine zones for moral contamination. You get your own special social exile, congrats! So here you are, a guy who never dreamed of this, stuck in a room where screams echo louder than prayers, where even the tools seem to whisper, and where no one asks if you're okay, because they'd rather forget you exist. You punch out for the night, if you can even call it that. The air outside is sharp with frost and smoke. A dog growls when you pass. Your hands tremble. Not from guilt, at least not anymore, but from knowing you'll do it all again tomorrow. And you haven't even met the Inquisitors yet. You'd think, after all that, someone might at least show you how to do the job. Maybe a mentor, a handbook, a quick workshop titled 10 Torture Tools and How Not to Kill Anyone Immediately. Nope. You're tossed into the medieval justice system like a chicken into a stew pot. No ceremony, no warning, and you're probably undercooked. Your first day isn't even day. It's just a blurry stretch of time in a cold, dark place. The guards drag in a man accused of theft. He's shivering, bleeding from his lip, and tied up with more rope than sense. You fumble with the tools like someone just handed you a box of dentist gear and told you to do open-heart surgery. There's a whip in one corner, a pulley system near the ceiling, and a tub full of what smells like old bacon grease. Is that wax? Oil? Who knows? You're supposed to use it, not understand it. You pick up a pair of tongs that look like salad servers from a nightmare. The prisoner starts begging. Not screaming. Begging. Tells you he's innocent. Tells you he has children. You pause, waiting for someone to jump in. Maybe the judge, the priest, but the room is empty. Just you, a stranger, and tools no sane person should touch. And so begins the game of trial and error. Emphasis on error. Your first attempt is clumsy. You apply pressure the wrong way. Instead of extracting a confession, you dislocate something. The guy passes out. You panic. You pour cold water on his face. You think about fleeing. Instead, you sit down and breathe into a rag that smells like every regret you've ever made. Eventually, someone checks on you. A guard opens the door, glances at the scene, shrugs, and leaves. No one tells you what you did right, or wrong. The man, still unconscious. The tools, silent, but judgmental. You start to realise that no one's really in charge down here. Not in the way you hoped. The magistrate gives orders, sure, but once the dungeon door closes, it's all on you. Want to try strappado? That's on you. Want to use iron spikes on their shins? Sure, but be ready to explain why the next guy didn't survive the night. Some torturers develop systems. You hear about one in Flanders who built a colour-coded chart for confession pressure levels. Another in Italy swore by astrology, only tortured on Thursdays. One eccentric soul in Prague hummed lullabies during floggings. Weird flex, but apparently effective. You don't have a system yet. You have a slowly growing pile of mistakes, some awkward apologies to corpses, and a strong suspicion that your tools are cursed. The lack of training isn't just physical. There's no preparation for the emotional gymnastics. You're supposed to intimidate, inflict, manipulate, but also stay composed, not kill the suspect, at least not too soon, and make sure the confession sounds believable. Sevens, it's like being a medieval actor, surgeon, and interrogator, all rolled into one sleep-deprived package. And you're not even getting paid hazard wages. Historians still argue whether most medieval torturers had formal training or if it was mostly learn as you maim. Some records mention apprenticeships, but others suggest people were plucked from jails, armies, or even executioner families with no clear structure. There's also a debate over whether techniques were passed down like folk recipes, a pinch of thumb screws, a dash of burning coals, or if each torturer had their own gruesome innovation station. Either way, nobody gives you feedback unless something goes wrong. Bad confession? That's your fault. Prisoner dies before trial? Also your fault. Too soft? You're useless. Too cruel? Now you're a liability. So you start experimenting. You make mental notes. Which tools are loudest? Which make people faint quickest? Which leave no marks? Important when the local bishop is watching. You get good, not proud, not skilled, just efficient. You learn that cold iron against skin gets a reaction faster than hot. That screaming makes other prisoners confess things they haven't even done. That if you hum while you work, people assume you're unhinged, and fear talks faster when it's confused. And then there's the paperwork. Oh yes, torture comes with paperwork. After each session, you're expected to record the method, the reaction, the confession, and whether the suspect survived. You do this by candlelight, trying not to smudge the ink with fingers that still smell like iron and fear. Sometimes you lie. Everyone does. Who's going to question it? The guy you accidentally impaled? Quirky tidbit. In some towns, torturers developed their own shorthand. Symbols instead of words. A jagged line might mean confessed under duress. A spiral could mean vomited on torturer. It was practical, and kept your notes out of curious hands. Still, nothing prepares you for the faces. They blur together eventually, sure, but in the beginning, they haunt you. You see them when you blink. In the steam of your tea, in the surface of still water, some praying, some staring. One smiling, and that's the worst. At night, you lie in bed fully dressed. You don't undress anymore. Too tired. Too cold. You stare at the ceiling and wonder how your life came to this. Once, you wanted to be a healer. Or a mason. Maybe just someone who sold turnips. Now, you're the town's darkest secret. They all know you're down there. They just pretend you're not. But the moment they need a confession, they remember real fast. So you sit there, in that damp room, holding a tool you still don't know the name of, watching the door creak open for the next unlucky soul, and you sigh, because you know the drill now. Literally. Your pay arrives in a mouldy cloth pouch. A few silver coins, dented, sticky, and barely enough to buy a hunk of cheese and a stale loaf. No hazard bonus, no thank you note, not even a nod from the guard who tosses it to you like he's feeding a dog that might bite. Welcome to your wages. Barely survival, with a side of humiliation. You try not to think about how much the baker makes, or the blacksmith, or the guy who chases geese out of the town square, because they all earn more than you, and they don't go to bed wondering if they're still human. What's worse, you can't complain. Not to anyone. The town hates you. Your employer barely acknowledges you. And God? You're not sure he's taking your calls anymore. Your living conditions are, let's say, rustic. You sleep in a room attached to your workshop. The walls are stone. The floor is straw. There's a chamber pot that froze last winter and never quite unfroze. The window doesn't open, not because it's sealed, but because it never had glass in the first place. Your breath fogs in the air at night. You keep a candle going so you don't wake up screaming in the dark, mistaking the shadows on the wall for former clients. 7s. As for your teeth, say goodbye. The diet of a medieval torturer is mostly gruel, dried fish, and bread so tough it could double as a bludgeon. No fresh fruit. No clean water. Just whatever's left after the soldiers and clergy take their cut. And that's when you start to notice the smell. It's you. It's your clothes. Your skin. Your tools. Everything you touch reeks of ash, rust, and fear. You scrub yourself with vinegar and old soap. You hang lavender near the door. It doesn't help. People still step back when you pass, covering their noses like you're contagious. You once tried going to the tavern on your night off, sat in the corner, nursing the cheapest ale, trying to be invisible. The room went quiet. Then someone said, loud enough for the whole place to hear, "That's him, the one who made old Jan cry like a child." 7s. You left before finishing the drink. From that point on, you stop trying to be part of the town. You buy your food early, when the stalls are empty. You speak only when spoken to. You forget what it's like to laugh. Historians still argue whether torturers were ostracised entirely or tolerated out of fear. Some towns housed them in remote corners or even outside the walls. Others made deals, reduced rent for silence. Either way, they weren't invited to weddings. But here's the kicker. Despite the hate, despite the poverty, people still come to you in secret. A merchant who suspects his wife of adultery. A farmer with a boundary dispute. A priest who wants a heretic softened up before confession. They don't ask nicely. They hint. They offer coin or chickens or a wheel of cheese if you make someone disappear. Unofficially, you say no. At first, but eventually, your stomach growls louder than your conscience. One night, you accept a side job from a minor noble. Just a little questioning. No trial. No witnesses. Just results. The extra coin helps. You buy better boots. You patch your roof. You almost feel normal again, until the whispers start. People say you're a murderer now. That you enjoy it. That you use pain the way a musician uses notes. You don't correct them. Quirky side note. Some towns gave torturers special cloaks or tokens so they wouldn't be mistaken for commoners, or so they could be recognised and avoided. One German torturer reportedly wore a red sash at all times. Not for honour. For warning. And if you're wondering about retirement, don't. There isn't one. Torturers don't grow old, not in peace. The job either kills you, disease, revenge, your own fraying mind, or you vanish one day and no one asks why. You're replaced, usually by someone even less qualified. You heard of one torturer who tried to open a bakery after quitting. Called it the honest loaf. Lasted 2 weeks. No one would eat his bread. Said it tasted like guilt. So you keep working. One eye on the tools, the other on the people who pretend you don't exist. And you wonder how long until someone stronger, younger, or more ruthless takes your place. Until then, you keep going. Because the job may be rotten, but it's the only thing you've got. And besides, the rack doesn't crank itself. You'd think you'd get used to it, the screams, the pleading, the smell of burned fabric and panic, but you don't. Not really. You just learn to file it all away into a quieter part of your brain. Somewhere dark. Somewhere you don't visit unless you're out of options or out of ale. But the thing no one warns you about? This job eats you alive from the inside out. You lose track of time. Days blend into each other, marked only by how many bones cracked or how many teeth you had to pry out to get someone to say the right words. Confessions come quicker now. Not because you're crueler, though maybe you are, but because you know the rhythm. You know what pain sounds like when it turns the corner into surrender. But every time you hear it, a little part of you crumbles. At night, you sit on the edge of your cot, staring at your hands. They look the same. Calloused, stained, shaking just a bit. But they don't feel like yours anymore. They feel like something that should have been buried a long time ago. Once, you used them to hold a spoon, to pet a dog, to build a fence for your uncle's pigs. Now they hold branding irons and iron pins. Now they make people cry out for their mothers. And sometimes they still do it when you dream. You've stopped going to confession. What would you even say? Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned repeatedly, on purpose, for money. 7s. You tried once. The priest flinched when you walked into the booth. Didn't even hide it. Just said something vague about divine roles and burdens. You haven't been back since. Historians still argue whether torturers felt guilt, or if they built up mental defences like soldiers do. Some left diaries full of regrets. Others wrote dry logs like accountants, reducing agony to numbers and outcomes. And then there are those who claim to enjoy it, but historians suspect even that was a kind of armour. You start noticing things. How no one ever touches you, not even by accident. How even the guards, who should be numb to violence, avoid looking directly at you. You pass by them and it's like you're not there, or worse, like you're some shadow that followed them home once and never left. Even animals treat you differently. Stray dogs growl. Cats bolt. A horse kicked your arm once so hard you couldn't move it for a week. The stable hand just shrugged and muttered, "Guess he sensed something." 7s. You stopped visiting the stables after that. The loneliness becomes its own kind of torture. Not the sharp, hot kind. The slow, seeping kind that gets into your joints and lungs and dreams. You try to tell yourself it's better this way. That you wouldn't want friends seeing what you've become. That it protects them. But some nights, the silence presses on your chest like a full-grown man. You talk to your tools just to break it. At first, it's jokes. Sarcastic little comments. "Guess we'll have a busy Tuesday, huh? Iron Maiden?" But then it slips. You ask them questions. You apologise when you drop one. You thank the thumbscrews for holding steady. They never answer, of course. Except sometimes. You think they do. In dreams. In the faint hum of the forge. In the way the rack creaks even when no one's on it. Quirky fact. There's a superstition in parts of medieval France that torture devices absorb souls. That the more blood they see, the more alive they become. One tool, called the Devil's Bell, was reportedly buried in a churchyard after it rang by itself during a thunderstorm. You haven't heard your tools speak. Yet. But they watch. And you feel it. Every time you walk past the cabinet. Every time you close the chest. Every time your hand hovers over the hot poker, wondering if this is the day you accidentally drop it on your own foot just to feel something clean. The worst part, you still remember your first real laugh. It was a nervous laugh. A twitch. A hiccup of disbelief after a suspect confessed to stealing the moonlight. Said he bottled it and sold it to witches. You laughed for real. And then you cried for an hour straight. That's when you knew. The job wasn't just changing you. It was hollowing you out. Like a log that still looks solid but breaks when you step on it. People say torture is a science. You know better. It's an art. And like all artists, you bleed into your work until there's nothing left of you except brushstrokes and shadow. There was a girl once. You don't remember her name. She was accused of heresy. You were told she was dangerous, that she'd cursed a bishop, that her tongue could summon storms. She was 14. You tried to be gentle. Used only pressure, no flame. She didn't scream. She just stared at you. Not with hatred. Not with fear. With pity. That stare stuck with you longer than any scream. It shows up when you least expect it. In puddles. In polished steel. In your reflection at the bottom of your drinking cup. And now, every time you go to work, you wonder what she saw in you. A monster? A victim? Something worse? You don't know. You just know it's too late to be anything else now. You'd think the church would be the one place you could find some sort of moral anchor, some reassurance that what you're doing, awful as it is, serves a greater good. Nope. Turns out, the church has a very complicated relationship with people like you. You're useful, but also embarrassing. See, officially, the church doesn't torture. That's what secular authorities are for. They just request clarification, and conveniently, someone like you shows up to apply pressure until divine truth bubbles up from a broken rib or a dislocated shoulder. And when you do it well, when someone confesses to heresy or devil worship and names names, the bishop smiles like it's all very unfortunate but necessary. He blesses the trial, maybe mutters something about the soul being saved, and then washes his hands like Pontius Pilate with better robes. But if things go sideways, someone dies too soon, a noble complains, or the villagers get queasy, suddenly your name is nowhere on the records. You're not a servant of God. You're just some anonymous instrument of justice. Sevens, and not even a clean one. Historians still argue whether church officials truly believed in the spiritual necessity of torture, or just tolerated it as a legal convenience. There's evidence on both sides. Some theologians agonized over it in letters. Others blessed the whips without blinking. You don't get any of that in a debate. All you get are vague instructions and the threat of eternal damnation if you mess up. Too soft, and you've failed your duty. Too brutal, and now you've dishonoured the faith. So you walk this bizarre tightrope, balancing religious rhetoric with red-hot irons. You're not allowed to torture on Sundays. That's the Lord's Day. Even heretics deserve a break while God's resting. But if someone dies from Friday's session and you don't find out until Sunday, that's not technically a violation. Loopholes everywhere. You're also not supposed to spill blood, which is hilarious, because most torture devices were designed to avoid external bleeding, stretching limbs, crushing bones, suffocating lungs. You become an expert in keeping people alive just long enough to confess. You've got a whole theology of pain now. You hear confessions like a priest, only without the robes, respect, or clean conscience. There's a priest assigned to your prison. He comes down once a week, talks to the condemned, offers final blessings. Sometimes he gives you a look, not judgment, not kindness, something murkier. Like he knows you're needed, but hates needing you. Once, he caught you after a particularly bad session. You were slumped outside the chamber, hands shaking, shirt soaked through with sweat. He sat beside you for a full 5 minutes before saying anything. Then he said, "They say God forgives all sins. But he also sees what we hide, even from ourselves." Sevens, you didn't answer. You just nodded. And he never brought it up again. Quirky tidbit. In some towns, torturers were excommunicated during their careers. Yep. Officially cast out from the church while still being paid by church officials. It was like hiring a lifeguard, then blaming them for water being wet. The mental gymnastics are incredible. There's a chapel near your chamber. Small, stone, probably older than the town itself. Sometimes you sit in the back pew, just to feel something close to peace. You never go up front. You never take communion. But you sit. Once, you lit a candle. Just one. For a boy who confessed to consorting with demons after you dislocated both shoulders. He died before trial. You told the magistrate he was too weak to make it through questioning. He told you to be more efficient next time. The candle burned for hours. You sat there the whole time. Didn't blink. Didn't pray. Just watched it melt into nothing. That's your relationship with faith now. Not devotion. Not rebellion. Just sitting beside the flame, watching it fade. You hear rumours of papal edicts, new rules about torture, limits, restrictions. You're told they only apply in theory, not practice. Keep doing what you're doing, they say. Just make it sound cleaner in the records. 7s. You start changing your terminology. Moderate encouragement. Spiritual coaxing. Non-lethal extraction. 7s. No one's fooled, but everyone pretends they are. That's how this whole thing works. Layers of lies, stacked on top of pain, wrapped in incense and Latin. You used to think God was watching. Now, you hope he isn't. Because if he is, and you end up standing in front of him someday, you've got a lot of explaining to do and no one's handing you a script. But still, you whisper his name sometimes. Just before sleep. Just after the worst screams. Like maybe he'll answer. Like maybe he hasn't given up on you completely. You don't hear anything back. But you whisper anyway. You walk through the market and people part like you're contagious. Eyes drop. Conversations halt. A child clutches her mother's sleeve and whispers, "That's him." You smile, instinct, habit, something human, and she starts to cry. Congratulations. You're officially the most hated man in town. Except when you're not. See, that's the weird thing. The same people who avoid you in daylight, they knock on your door at night. Sometimes it's subtle, just a folded note, or a sack of potatoes with a name carved into the side. Sometimes it's direct. Desperate. "My brother's been stealing from me," one merchant says, eyes twitching like he's already rehearsed this. Just scare him a little. He'll confess. 7s. Or, "There's a woman who gave my daughter a strange root. Now she's coughing blood. Please, make her talk." 7s. You try to say no. You really do. But sometimes the coin's too tempting. Sometimes the revenge sounds justified. And sometimes, on the worst nights, you take the job just to feel wanted. They hate you until they need you. And then you're indispensable. It's a strange power. Not respect, not admiration, just raw, transactional fear. You're like a loaded crossbow in human form. No one wants to look at you, but everyone wants to aim you. And that gets into your head. Historians still argue whether torturers held social leverage or remained total outcasts. Some records suggest towns relied on them for all kinds of unofficial justice. Others show they were little more than tools, dumped when they became inconvenient. You're somewhere in the middle. Feared, yes. Avoided, definitely. But also useful. A noble once invited you to his estate, not publicly, of course. After dark, through the servant's entrance. Sat you down, offered you mulled wine, and asked how you get people to confess without breaking them. You didn't answer. He didn't press. But he slipped a gold coin under your mug when he left. The next week, his rival was arrested. Coincidence? Sure. But even your enemies treat you carefully. No one wants to be the reason you get curious. Or creative. One blacksmith tried to insult you once. Called you the devil's garbage boy in front of a crowd. You said nothing. Just looked at him. Long, quiet, unblinking. A week later, his apprentice disappeared for 3 days. You didn't touch him. You didn't even know he was missing. But when the apprentice came back, drunk, apparently, the blacksmith begged you to forgive him. Offered you free shoeing for life. You declined. Just nodded. But after that, the whispers started. That you don't need tools. That your stare alone can peel the truth from someone's bones. That you made a merchant confess to adultery just by showing up at his stall. You've become a story. A warning. Parents say your name to keep kids in bed. Drunks sober up when you enter a room. Even dogs cross the street. And you learn to use it. You lean into the silence, the stillness, the weight of your own reputation. You make your movements slow, deliberate. You speak less, listen more. Let them fill the quiet with their own panic. Because the truth is, they'll believe whatever makes you seem scarier than the truth. Quirky tidbit. Some torturers were rumoured to have magic powers, curses, evil eyes, even the ability to smell guilt. One Hungarian torturer was buried in an iron coffin because locals believed his bones could raise the dead. You don't correct the rumours. Let them think what they want. But the duality grates on you. The same people who curse your name during sermons will knock on your door that night with a bribe and a name. The same priest who refuses to shake your hand will quietly thank you when a heretic confesses before dawn. You start keeping 2 ledgers. One for the official work, the confessions, the charges, the outcomes, and another for the extracurriculars, the side deals, the favours, the ones you never admit to. That second book? It gets thicker faster. You know you're playing a dangerous game. Too many secrets. Too many debts. One wrong move, and someone burns your hut to the ground and says it was divine justice. But at least it means you matter. And in this job, that's the only currency that lasts. You stop caring what people say about you. You care what they whisper. Because whispers get you food, get you safety, get you leverage. And in a town that wants you gone but keeps you close, that's the only way to survive. There's a certain smell that never quite leaves your nose, burnt linen, scorched oil, and something unmistakably human. You think it's the iron, but it's not. It's what clings to the iron, what seeps in after months of forced confessions and involuntary flailing. And guess whose job it is to clean that mess up? Yours? No, there's no cleaning crew. No apprentices scrubbing the walls while you take a long lunch and contemplate your existence. You're the torturer, the janitor, the errand boy, and sometimes, on really bad days, the rat wrangler. You finish a session. You're soaked in sweat and guilt. The room smells like fear and hot rope. You want to just sit down. But nope, the brazier's still glowing, the cuffs are slick with something sticky, and that one weird stain on the wall is starting to attract flies. Time to clean. You start with the obvious. The tools. You've got buckets, one with vinegar, one with water that hasn't been fresh since the Crusades, and one that used to be for grain before you rebranded it as your disinfectant tub. You dunk the tongs, scrub the manacles with straw, and try not to gag when something peels off the stretching rack with a noise like wet parchment. Some stains never come out. And some stains you just stop seeing. There's no bleach, no gloves, no antiseptic. Just cold hands and colder water. Historians still argue whether torture chambers were regularly cleaned or left to fester as part of the psychological effect. Some dungeons, they say, were kept pristine to project control. Others were pits of rotting misery, designed to intimidate with their filth. Yours? Somewhere in between. You try. You do. But you also gave up on perfect hygiene when the cleaning rags started growing fur. And then there's the smell. It gets into your clothes, your hair, your soul, probably. No matter how many herbs you hang from the rafters or how much rosemary oil you pour into the brazier, it lingers. You walk through town and people sniff the air before they see you. You've tried bathing in the river, once. The fish avoided you for days. Quirky fact. Some torturers in the Mediterranean region reportedly use citrus peels and salt to mask the odours. A few even wore leather pouches stuffed with mint around their necks, like medieval Fabrizi. You tried that. It didn't help. Just made it smell like a haunted apothecary. The tools themselves are another issue. Iron warps, wood splinters, ropes fray. You're constantly patching things together like a cursed handyman. 1 week, the pulley breaks mid-hoist and sends a suspect tumbling to the floor. You try to cushion his fall, your shoulder pops out instead. Now you're in pain and under suspicion of sabotage. You hammer together a crude fix with nails and hope. It holds. Barely. There's one device, a spiked chair, that rattles when no one's near it. You tell yourself it's just settling. Old wood. Drafty stone. Definitely not. Something else. But you still avoid it when you're alone. Once, you spent an entire day oiling the rack until the crank turned smooth and silent. You felt almost proud. Then you realised a quiet crank makes the process less terrifying. Back to rusty and screechy it goes. Pain, it turns out, has a soundtrack. But cleaning isn't just physical. There's a mental scrubbing you do, too. You tidy up your memories. You pretend that last guy didn't call for his sister, that the woman from last week didn't die with her eyes open, that the screams don't sound like your own voice slowed down and warped. It's a kind of survival, because if you don't clear it all away, piece by piece, it starts stacking up. And the last thing you need in a room full of iron and shadows is a breakdown. Sometimes the cleaning takes longer than the torture itself. That's when you really start questioning your life choices. You tell yourself it's just another part of the job, like sharpening blades or feeding the fire. A necessary evil. But deep down, you know there's something ritualistic about it. Like you're trying to undo what you just did. Or maybe pretend it didn't happen. And the worst part, it never feels clean. You finish, step back, take a breath, and it still smells like despair. Still looks like someone cried their final prayers against those walls. Still echoes, even when no one's there. You throw out the water. It hits the cobblestones behind the chamber with a sick splash. You pour more vinegar. You sweep up what's left of the straw and teeth and shame. Then you sit. Not because you're done, but because there's nothing else you can do. You've wiped the blade, but not the blood in your brain. You've aired the room, but not the rot behind your ribs. You rest your head on the cool stone wall and wonder if anyone ever cleaned you off after your first time, or if they just left you to soak in it like everyone else. Probably the latter. So you get up. Pick up the tools. Place them gently back in their box, like delicate instruments. One by one, carefully. Like maybe this time, if you do it right, they'll stay quiet for the night. They don't, but you hope anyway. It's barely past sunrise, and already they're dragging in another one. Young, maybe 20. Doesn't look like he's eaten in days. His wrists are bound tight with twine, and there's a fresh welt under one eye, already blooming dark purple. The guard grunts, tosses him on the floor like a sack of mouldy grain, and mutters, says he stole a chalice. From the abbey? Then he adds, with a shrug that carries no weight, could be lying, could be someone else's. Sevens. You glance down at the kid, because he is a kid, and feel that familiar knot twist behind your ribs. You've been doing this long enough to know what's coming. The confession's already expected. The magistrate wants this wrapped up before the noon bell. There's no time for doubt. No room for innocence. But still, he looks at you like he's not supposed to be here. And maybe he's not. The truth is, sometimes you torture the wrong person. Sometimes it's a mistaken identity. A rival's lie. A misunderstanding that's spiraled out of control. And sometimes it's just politics. Someone needed to be guilty, and the dice rolled badly for this poor soul. Your job is to turn maybe into definitely, using whatever means make that happen. He says he didn't do it. They all do. He says he was home with his sister. No witnesses. He says he's never even seen the chalice. Too bad. The church says it's gone. The priest saw him near the altar. That's good enough for trial. And by trial, we mean this. You start with a rope and questions. It's always better to ease into these things. You hope, genuinely hope, he's lying. That he did steal it. That this isn't one of those times. But he doesn't break. Not after an hour. Not after 2. So you reach for the heavier tools. Historians still argue whether medieval torture was about justice, deterrence, or just raw fear. Some say it was meant to scare others into obedience. Others say it was never really about truth, just spectacle. You know what it's about. Pressure. Up, 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 until someone cracks. And when they do, everyone breathes easier, even you. So you do what you're paid to do. You make the room smaller, the air hotter, the time slower. You squeeze the confession out like blood from a wound that never closes right. Eventually, he breaks. Voice hoarse, body trembling, tears mixing with spit. "I took it," he says. "I'm sorry. I thought it was silver." 7s. You stop. Let him sit in it. Then you nod to the guard. He's ready. 7s. And just like that, it's over. Except it's not. Because now comes the part you hate most. Wondering if that confession was real. Quirky tidbit. There was a medieval belief that a false confession would cause your tongue to blacken or swell. So after each session, some torturers inspected the suspect's mouth for signs. A swollen tongue meant divine punishment. A normal one? Guess God was fine with it. You've checked mouths before. You don't anymore. You walk home that night and realise you can't even remember the boy's name. You think it started with an R, or maybe an L. Doesn't matter. You'll be hanging by sunrise. Another tick in your ledger. Another whisper in the corridor. You don't eat dinner. Just stare at the wall until the candle burns out. There was a man once who insisted, right up to the end, that he was innocent. No confession. No begging. Just quiet, pained defiance. They hanged him anyway. 2 weeks later, the real thief was caught with the stolen ring still in his boot. You remember that man's face more clearly than your own reflection. You try to keep score. Try to balance it out. For every wrong confession, you work twice as hard to make the next one clean. You look for signs of guilt. You give second chances. You ask more questions. But you're still part of a machine that doesn't care. Truth doesn't matter here. Closure does. They want someone to blame, someone to punish. And you make that happen. Whether it's right or not is a problem for the next world. People say justice is blind. You say it's deaf, too. Once, you stopped a session midway. Something didn't sit right. The suspect's story held together too well. The fear felt too raw. You told the magistrate you needed more time. He docked your pay for hesitation. 7s. Another time, you tried to refuse an interrogation. The accused was a widow in her 70s. Could barely stand, let alone plot murder. You said she wasn't a threat. The bishop overruled you. Said the devil hides in weak vessels. You did your job. She died anyway. So, yeah, sometimes you torture the wrong person. Not because you want to. Not even because you're careless. Because the system doesn't care who's guilty. It just cares that someone confessed, and that someone screamed loud enough for the town to sleep easy. So now you're working with people who make you look well-adjusted, and that's saying something. Your co-workers, your so-called colleagues, are the only people who know what your job actually involves. They're also the last people you'd ever want to be stuck in a locked room with. There's Gregor, the assistant executioner. He's built like an ox and talks like he was dropped as a child and never quite recovered. His favourite pastime? Telling you how much blood he saw today, in detail. He once compared a decapitation to splitting a melon with a rusty spoon. Then there's Marta, the local herbalist who moonlights as an informant and occasionally hands you potions to loosen tongues. She calls them chatty water. You don't ask what's in them. But the worst is Otmar. Otmar is the guy who likes it. Not in a subtle, maybe he's just coping kind of way. No, Otmar hums while he works. He carves patterns into the handles of his pliers, says it helps channel energy. He keeps a personal journal labelled Special Sounds. You peeked once. It was full of notes like Subject 4, shrieked at pitch similar to Wounded Falcon. Interesting. Sevens. You avoid Otmar, but you also depend on him. See, sometimes you need someone who doesn't flinch. Someone who steps in when your hands shake or your mind goes blank. Otmar always volunteers. And that's the problem. Historians still argue whether medieval torturers were naturally cruel or if their personalities were warped by their work. Some say the job attracted damaged people. Others argue it made them that way. It's the medieval version of the chicken or egg problem, with a lot more chickens screaming. You've tried to keep your distance, draw boundaries, but down here, under the courthouse or next to the gallows, there's no such thing as a healthy workplace culture. You're all marinating in the same fear-stained stew. Lunch breaks are surreal. Otmar munches on onions while describing a new stretching technique. Gregor burps and brags about how fast he can tie a hangman's knot. Marta offers you a brownish vial and says it'll help with your dreams. You politely decline. There's no camaraderie, no banter. Just this tense, shared silence between people who know too much about each other's darkness. You learn fast. Trust no one, especially not the guy who sharpens his hooks during small talk. But the loneliness is worse. You try once, just once, to bond. You bring a loaf of bread to share. Something warm. Something simple. Otmar takes a slice and says, "You ever notice how kneading dough feels like working muscle tissue?" Sevens. You nod, throw the rest of the loaf in the fire, and never try again. Quirky tidbit. Some towns forced torturers to socialise together, housed them in the same quarters, sat them at the same tavern table. The idea was that no one else would tolerate them, so they might as well suffer in a group. It rarely ended well. One torturer in Bohemia stabbed his co-worker during an argument over confession strategy. The town built separate shacks after that. You sometimes fantasize about escape. Not from the job, though yes, that too, but from them. The others. The lifers. The ones who make you wonder if maybe you're the sane one after all. And then comes the worst realization. You're becoming one of them. You start keeping your own notes. Not like Otmar's, nothing weird. But still, details, patterns. Which bone breaks fastest? Which words make people panic? You catch yourself humming during clean-up. You laugh when Gregor makes a joke about pulling teeth with pliers still warm from the forge. You weren't always like this. You remember a time when you flinched at blood, when you felt sick during your first interrogation, when you apologised, silently, but still, to every person you hurt. Now you measure your work in efficiency, in technique, in speed, and you wonder, is this survival or rot? The line blurs. You overhear Marta talking to a scribe once. She says, "He's good, that one. Quiet. Efficient. Doesn't enjoy it, but doesn't resist it either." Sevens, that stays with you. Longer than it should. You don't enjoy it, but you don't stop. And that makes you different from Otmar, right? Right? You start noticing little things. Otmar sharpens his hooks more than necessary. Gregor breaks fingers when no one's looking. Marta's potions smell like something not meant for human use. You report nothing, because to report means drawing attention. And attention is dangerous when you're already on thin ice, socially and spiritually. You keep your head down. Do the work. Nod when spoken to. Never ask questions you don't want answered. But late at night, when the fire's low and the rats are chewing something you hope isn't important, you lie awake wondering, Sevens, if they vanished tomorrow, Otmar, Gregor, Marta, would anyone notice? Would you? And worse, would you miss them? You wake up coughing, again. The air in your chamber is thick, musty, and warmer than it should be. Not in a comforting, hearth fire and blanket way. More like someone lit a damp goat on fire and shut the door. Your chest aches. Your joints creak. Your eyes sting every morning like someone rubbed garlic into them. You try to breathe through your mouth, but that's worse, because now you can taste the air. Like rust and soot had a baby and fed it ashes. You're sick. Of course you're sick. You've been sick for a while, actually. It started as a tickle in your throat, then the headaches, then the night sweats. But you told yourself it was stress, or bad bread, or just part of the job. It's not. Your skin's clammy, your fingers tremble when you grip the wheel on the rack, and the heat from the brazier makes you dizzy after 10 minutes. You blacked out briefly last week, slumped against the wall, woke up with your head in a bucket and no idea how long you'd been out. Still, no one cares. You get no sick days, no physician, no rest. The magistrate doesn't want excuses, he wants results. The guards don't ask questions. And the church, they'll pray for you, from a distance. So you keep working. You tape your wrists. You drink whatever martyr gives you. You sleep in 10-minute spurts between sessions and dream of fire and bells and the sound of your own bones grinding. You're not the only one falling apart, though. Gregor's had a hacking cough since winter. Otmar's left eye twitches constantly now, like it's trying to escape his skull. Marta's voice is cracking more than usual, and the other day you saw her slip something into her own tea when she thought no one was looking. Historians still argue whether torturers were expected to work until death, or if they had any medical rights at all. There's scarce evidence of torturer pensions, retirement, or even grave markers. Most just disappeared from the records, like pain erased them when they outlived their usefulness. You're probably heading the same way. You once asked for time off. Just a day. Just to rest. Maybe find someone who could patch the fever boiling under your ribs. They said no. Said the schedule was full. Said justice doesn't pause because someone's feeling a bit off. Sevens. So you soaked your rags in cold water, wrapped them around your chest, and kept going. You tried herbal remedies. Thistle, ground mustard seed, even raw onion tied under your armpits. Old village trick. None of it worked. Though the onion kept people even further away, so there's that. Your vision blurs sometimes. You see double. Your hearing fades in and out like someone's moving a door in your head. You speak more slowly now, partly from exhaustion, partly to hide the fact that your mouth feels like it's full of hot sand. And still, they bring them in. Every morning, another body, another charge, another list of questions they expect answered before supper. You smile weakly. Try to remember your script. This can go quickly. All I need is the truth. Your voice cracks halfway through, but no one notices. Or cares. The suspect looks scared. You look worse. Sometimes you think they pity you. Quirky tidbit. In some parts of Eastern Europe, torturers were forbidden from entering public baths, not because they were impure, but because they were thought to bring disease. People believed that too much exposure to suffering could rot your blood. You're starting to think they were onto something. You sit on a bench after one session, drenched in sweat, spots flickering in your vision, and realise you don't remember the suspect's face, or their name, or even the charge. Just pain. A blur of it. Like you've become a conductor in a symphony no one hears but everyone fears. You lean forward and cough into your sleeve. Red. Not dark red. Not a little. You wipe it away and pretend you didn't see it. You have no other option. Because if you stop, you're not just out of a job. You're a liability. And liabilities in this town don't retire. They just vanish. One torturer, Albrecht, tried to quit. Said he'd had enough. Said he wanted to raise goats or maybe take up carving. He lasted 3 days. Then his house burned down. No one investigated. Another got promoted to the capital. Everyone cheered. 6 weeks later, his head came back in a box, labelled Confessor's Remorse. So no, you don't quit. You drag yourself through each day, limping and coughing, wondering if this is your last shift or just another chapter in the slow collapse of your body and mind. You dream of being bedridden, of people bringing you soup and cool cloths and quiet words. But that's not your fate. You are not allowed to be fragile. You are the torturer. And until you drop in the middle of a session, face down on a blood-stained stone floor with a hot poker cooling beside you, you'll keep going. Because sick or not, this town doesn't care about your pain. Only the pain you cause. There's a smell in the air today, sharper than usual, like roasted meat mixed with something acrid and metallic. You know that smell. It's the scent of fire justice. They've scheduled a branding. Could be a thief, maybe a forger, maybe just someone the magistrate doesn't like. Doesn't matter. You're the one holding the iron, so it's your day to sizzle. The tools are already heating in the brazier. Long rods with cruel little insignias on the tips, each one tied to a specific crime. T for thief. H for heretic. W for witch. And a spiral design for those the church simply deems unfit. 7s. You pull on your gloves. The leather's cracked and soot-stained, and one fingertip is missing, burned off last spring when the iron slipped in your grip. You still feel the ghost of it, especially when the flames rise. You pick up the rod. Hold it near your face to check the glow. The metal's orange, pulsing. You can hear it hum. Outside, the crowd gathers. Branding is a public event. It's punishment and theatre wrapped into one scalding package. The town needs to see the pain to believe the justice. You hate these days. Torture in the chamber is awful, but at least it's quiet. Private. Controlled. Branding. That's just humiliation, with you as the opening act. They bring the accused forward. It's a man this time, middle-aged, hands trembling, tears already falling, caught forging tax seals. Desperate, maybe. Clever, certainly. But also unlucky. He's tied to the post. Shirt torn open. The crowd jeers. Some laugh. A child throws a stone that misses by inches. You step forward, rod in hand, trying not to notice how your own hands are shaking. You press the brand to his shoulder. The hiss is immediate. Flesh sears. The man screams. The smell hits you hard. Cooked skin, sweat, and panic. You clench your jaw and count. 1, 2, 3. You pull the iron away. The letter is perfect. Neat, clean, legible. You've done this enough times to be good at it, which somehow makes it worse. Historians still argue whether branding was more about punishment or permanent identification. Some saw it as a warning to others. Others believed it marked the soul through the skin. Either way, it was meant to last. And it does. Forever. The man will carry that letter until he dies, if he lives that long. You hand off the iron and step back. The magistrate nods. The guards untie the man and drag him away. The crowd disperses, murmuring approval like they just watched a play. You wonder if they'll be talking about the shape of the burn at supper. You hope not. You hope they choke on their stew. You retreat to the chamber, still shaking. Your arm's been acting up again, nerve pain from an old burn that never healed right. You pour water on the gloves, watching steam rise like ghosts from the leather. And then it gets worse. Because today is also a boiling day. Not water. Oil. They've scheduled a double session. Branding for the forger, scalding for a poisoner. You don't ask for details. You just refill the cauldron and stoke the fire. The setup is simple. Hands tied, feet bound, oil heated until it bubbles. You lower the hands in, briefly, just enough to cause agony, not enough to kill. You know exactly how long that takes. You don't look at the woman's face. She's pleading, praying, offering names that might not even be real. You nod like you're listening, then give the signal. The guards hold her. You lower the chain. The scream starts high and goes higher, slicing through your skull like a bell gone wrong. You smell the oil and the skin and the hair. You hear the guards swear under their breath. One looks away. You do not. Because if you look away, you'll drop her in too deep. You pull her back. She's sobbing, the burns already bubbling, skin like parchment curled at the edges. You order cold water, a salve. You don't expect her to live, but you do what you can. Not out of mercy, out of duty. You clean the chain. Quirky fact. In parts of England, boiling was once used as execution, not interrogation. The condemned were dropped in fully, slowly, and cooked alive. Supposedly fitting for poisoners, as they caused internal damage. Eye for an eye. Pain for pain. You thank whatever thin barrier of rules still exists that today was not one of those executions. You sit in the corner afterward, exhausted. Your arms throb. Your head rings. You realise you've gone the whole day without eating or drinking. And then the knock comes. Another suspect. This one for arson with malicious spirit. Whatever that means. You don't move. Not right away. You stare at the floor, still slick with scalding water and regret, and wonder if you're about to pass out or explode. But neither happens. You stand, slowly, mechanically, because branding and boiling are done for now. But you're not done yet. You're back in the square, this time not as the central act, but close enough to taste the tension in the air. There's a mob gathering, torches in hand, pitchforks sharp and wobbling with adrenaline. Someone's yelling about taxes. Another shouts about grain. The real reason? Doesn't matter. They're angry, they're hungry, and they want someone to blame. And guess who's standing 3 feet from the gallows, right in the blast radius of public rage? You. When a town turns sour, when the air gets thick with unrest and everyone starts looking for someone to throw off a roof, the king's too far, the lord's too protected, the priest's too holy. You're right there. The people remember your face. They remember the screams. They remember that time their cousin came back from questioning with a limp and empty eyes. You're the human face of suffering, the one they can reach. You can feel the mood shifting, like a herd of animals deciding whether to charge. You edge toward the alley, not because you're scared. Okay, maybe you are, but because this isn't your scene. You're not the enforcer anymore. You're the target. It's a dangerous irony. The more loyal you are to the system, the more exposed you become when that system falters. And right now, the walls are creaking. The mayor appears, waving a scroll and shouting something about law and order. It does nothing. The crowd jeers. Someone throws a turnip. Another yells your name, not in fear this time, but with a fist in the air. You slip away before it gets worse. Back in your chamber, you bolt the door, press your back to it, and wait. Sweat runs down your spine. Your tools hang quietly on the wall, like sleeping dogs. You stare at them and wonder if you'll need them tonight, for defence. Because when the mob turns, no one checks your job title. Historians still argue whether torturers were protected by law during uprisings, or simply left to fend for themselves. Some cities had guards posted at their homes during riots. Others threw them to the wolves. You have no guards. Just Oswald the Rat, and he's firmly neutral. You think back to that uprising 2 winters ago, when the grain prices spiked and 5 men were pulled from their beds and beaten in the street. One of them was the jailer. They found his boots a week later, half burned, in a ditch. You wore someone else's cloak for a month after that. You try to blend in when trouble brews. Keep your head down. Wear neutral colours. No apron, no tools. Just another tired face in the crowd. But it doesn't always work. Your gait is too familiar. Your eyes too hollow. People know. They know what you've done. They just forget. Until the system cracks and they remember too much. Quirky tidbit. In some places, torturers were given aliases during festivals or riot seasons to protect them from retaliation. One record from Nuremberg shows a man listed as Master of Adjustments during civil unrest, later revealed to be the chief torturer, hiding in plain sight. You're not that lucky. You tried aliases once. Introduced yourself to a travelling merchant as a smith of special ironworks. He nodded like he understood. You think he still ran the other way. Your paranoia spikes during holidays. People drink more, complain louder. You stay inside. You keep the fire low and the tools covered. You check the bolts 3 times before bed. There's a pouch of coins hidden under your floorboards. Emergency funds, in case you need to vanish in the night. You've rehearsed it. South Road. Abandoned mill. Change of clothes by the creek. But you never run. Because if you do, they'll assume you had something to hide. And in this town, missing equals guilty. 7s. So you wait it out. Every time, every riot, every food shortage, every death that stinks of politics. You keep your face blank. You keep your tone quiet. You keep your body behind doors and your name out of conversations. But no matter how invisible you try to be, you know the truth. 7s. You're the face they remember when justice fails. You are the lightning rod. And one day, maybe not today, maybe not this year, but one day, 7s, you will be the one tied to the post. You'll hear the crowd. You'll smell the smoke. And someone, maybe Otmar, maybe worse, will be the one holding the iron. They're calling it a witch trial, but you know better. It's not about witchcraft. It never is. It's about control. About fear. About watching someone weaker burn so the rest of the village can sleep easier. You're in the chamber again. This time, the accused is a woman, mid-30s, maybe. Too smart. Too outspoken. Too unafraid of priests. Someone heard her mutter to herself. Someone's crops failed. Someone's baby caught a fever. Now she's here. You get handed a list of questions. They're the same every time. 7s. Do you consort with the devil? Do you fly at night? Do you own a cat that doesn't fear water? You want to ask, is this a joke? But it's not. It's deadly serious. The guards don't even look at her. One lights a candle. The other unrolls a scroll with great theatrical flair. You're the one who steps forward, holding the tools like a priest holds the chalice. Except you're here to break, not to bless. She doesn't scream at first. Just stares at you, calm and steady. It throws you off. People usually beg, deny, cry. She just watches, like she's judging you. You ask the first question. She says no. You nod, move to the next one. Still no. So you begin. First it's the chair, then the ropes, then the iron tongs. You press gently. At first, you're trying to make her confess before it gets worse. But she doesn't break. Hours pass. Her voice cracks. Her hands tremble, but she won't say it. Won't give them what they want. Historians still argue whether witch trials were actually about rooting out witches, or just tools to silence certain people, often women, who didn't fit the mould. The overwhelming majority of the accused? Widows? Midwives? Healers? Women who spoke their minds. And you're the one sent to make them stop. There's a tool on the table you haven't used in a while, the witch pricker. A fine, sharp blade used to pierce the skin, searching for the devil's mark. Supposedly, witches don't bleed from it, or feel pain. You've never once seen that happen, but the townspeople believe it. They need to believe it, so you prick her skin, lightly, over and over, her arms, her legs, the back of her neck. Tiny red dots bloom across her skin like a cruel constellation, and still she denies it all. Eventually, someone suggests the ordeal. You hate ordeals. This one's the water test. Strip her, tie her up, throw her in the river. If she floats, she's a witch. If she sinks, she's innocent. Either way, she's going under. Quirky tidbit? The idea behind the water test came from the belief that water, as a pure element, would reject the witch's sinful body. Of course, binding someone's arms and legs before throwing them into a river pretty much guarantees one thing. They don't come back up. You watch them prepare the ropes. Watch the townsfolk gather at the riverbank with faces like theatre-goers awaiting a tragedy. You don't follow. You just stand in the chamber, the empty chair still warm, her blood still dotting the stone floor like red seeds. You listen to the murmurs fade as the procession moves out. Then the silence. Then the splash. Then nothing. You close your eyes. She didn't scream. They say she floated. That's what they'll write. She floated, so she was guilty. So it's over. Another witch purged. Another evil undone. But you know what the guards whispered when they came back, soaking and shivering? She sank like a rock. Sevens. They waited, pulled her out, and said she floated anyway. Because they needed her to be guilty. Because no one wanted to be wrong. You clean the floor, you wipe down the chair, you scrub the pricker and try not to think about the look she gave you. Not fear, not hatred, just pity. You hate that most of all. Later that night, Otmar says, "We're doing good work. You'll see. This town will be better off." Sevens. You don't respond. Because you saw something when you leaned in close to ask that final question. Not magic. Not madness. Just tears. Just a woman. Just a human being who never should have been down here in the first place. You lie awake that night, hearing the river in your mind. The splash. The silence. And you wonder, how many of them sank? How many truths drowned while you stood there, waiting for someone to float? Something's wrong with the tools. You don't say it out loud, not even in jest, but you feel it. The room has shifted. The iron feels heavier. The wooden handles are colder than they should be. The chains rattle when no one touches them. At first, you blame the draft, the season, the humidity, anything rational. But the feeling doesn't go away. It sits with you, pressing into your spine like an old injury. One night, you stay late. Just cleaning. No suspects, no guards, no distractions. You're scrubbing dried blood from the vice screw when the rack creaks. No one touched it. You freeze. Listen. Wait. Nothing. You go back to cleaning. Then it creaks again. Twice. It's rhythmic. Like breathing. You stand slowly, every muscle in your body tensed like a drawn bowstring. The air's thick, heavy. The candle flickers, though there's no breeze. You walk to the rack, hand on your belt knife, heart pounding. You check the crank. It's still. The chains. Motionless. But something feels watched. You leave early that night. Historians still argue whether torturers in the Middle Ages believed their tools were cursed or simply internalized the guilt so deeply that it created psychological hallucinations. Some journals hint at whispers during lonely shifts. Others mention nightmares bleeding into waking hours. You haven't told anyone. Otmar would laugh, or worse, agree. Gregor would grunt and mutter about sleep. Marta would offer you a tincture labelled something like "Ghost be gone." 7s, so you stay quiet. But it gets worse. You hear your name, not loud, not clear, just a whisper. Once while polishing the branding irons. Once while locking up. Always from the corner of the room. Always when your back is turned. You spin around. Nothing. You think you're losing it. You start moving the tools. Rearranging them. Maybe it's just where they sit. Maybe that'll fix it. But when you come back the next day, they're all back in their original places. Exactly. You start documenting it. Not in the official ledger. Just notes. Scratches in the back of a torn parchment. Move tongs. Return to bench. Rack creaked. No one inside. Felt cold breath while branding rod cooled. 7s. You burn the notes after a week. Can't stand to read them anymore. Quirky tidbit. There's a medieval folktale about a torturer's bell that rang whenever someone lied in its presence. The twist? It rang when he spoke. 2. Drove him mad. He buried it. The church dug it up and used it as a dinner bell. It kept ringing during sermons. You wonder if your tools remember things. There's one pair of iron pliers you haven't used in a while. You left them in the chest, sealed tight. The last person they touched died from shock. You never cleaned them. One morning, you open the chest and they're sitting on top of the other tools. You didn't put them there. And they're warm. You start sleeping with a knife. The dreams come back. Not just screams now, laughter. High-pitched, bubbling laughter. You wake in a cold sweat, throat raw like you were the one yelling. You dream the tools are talking. Not words. Sounds. Metal on metal. Whispers in iron. You wake to the sound of the brazier flaring on its own. Once, the poker was red hot when you hadn't lit a fire in 2 days. You bring in a priest. He says a quick blessing. Doesn't look around much. Leaves before you can ask questions. The next day, he's gone. Left town. No message. People say he was transferred. You wonder if that's the word they use when someone runs. You try to convince yourself it's just guilt. Just the mind unravelling from too many nights spent alone in the dark with too many broken people. But one day, a boy is brought in, a thief. Young. Scared. You barely start the session before he blurts out, "The iron is alive. It sees me." 7s. You stop cold. You didn't say a word about it. You ask what he means. He stares at the tools. Starts crying. Says the rack whispered to him when he was locked in the holding room. You send him away. No torture. Just a signature and a lie. You scrub the chamber harder than ever before. You burn sage. You throw holy water on the hinges. You carve symbols into the frame of the door, protection signs you remember from your grandmother's house. Nothing changes. The sounds stay. The creaks. The whispers. The heat from tools that haven't been touched. You start talking to them again. Not out of madness. Out of respect. Because maybe, just maybe, they're not just instruments. Maybe they're witnesses. And maybe they're tired too. They bring you a man in chains, but he's smiling. Not the fake, shaky grin of someone masking fear. Not the broken smirk of a prisoner who's already given up. No, this is something else. This is intentional. Confident. Calm. He's led in slowly, without protest. Sits when told. Doesn't flinch at the sight of the tools. Doesn't speak unless asked, and when he does, his voice is measured. Warm, even. You read the charges. Blasphemy. Disruption. Leading a cult-like gathering. 7s. He nods, like someone just complimented his handwriting. You ask the usual questions. He answers honestly, talks about visions, about divine purpose, about how pain is a step on the ladder to purity, how suffering brings people closer to something holy. He's not just accepting torture, he's welcoming it. You've dealt with screamers, beggars, the silent types, but this is new. This is someone who wants what you do, who wants to be hurt, not to confess, not to avoid execution, but because it affirms something in them. You hesitate. He notices. You're not like they say, he says softly. You're not the devil. You're the test. Sevens. He closes his eyes, raises his chin, and waits. You don't move. Not right away. You're caught between disbelief and something darker, curiosity. Historians still argue whether self-inflicted suffering during interrogations was a sign of religious zealotry or mental collapse. Some cults believe torture was a divine gift, that the more you could endure, the closer you were to the angels. You've read about them. You never thought you'd meet one. You test him. Start small. A heated pin pressed to the thigh. He doesn't flinch. Just breathe through it like it's a stretch. You wrap cords around his arms, tighten slowly. He whispers a prayer between clenched teeth. Eventually, he speaks again. I hope I survive this, but if I don't, then I'll be remembered. Sevens. That's what this is. He wants to make a mark. And you? You're the pen. He starts humming. A low tune. No words, just rhythm. It syncs with the creaking of the leather, the crackle of the brazier. For a second, it sounds almost peaceful, almost sacred. You step back. The air feels wrong. You look at his face. He's crying now, but not from pain, from joy. He thanks you. You feel sick. You stop the session. Say the man is broken, unfit for questioning. The magistrate complains, but you push. Say he's trying to manipulate the process, which is technically true. The man is moved to a cell. No tools. No noise. A few days later, he dies. They say it was an infection. You don't ask questions, but you can't stop thinking about it. Because it wasn't just him. There have been others. A woman accused of witchcraft who kept laughing no matter what you did. A boy who tried to cut off his own finger before the questioning began, said he wanted to give you something up front. A monk who begged for the rack said it would prove his faith. These aren't victims. They're volunteers, and that unsettles you more than any scream. You start to wonder what they see in you. Do they think you're holy? Are you part of some divine rite they've invented in their heads? Are you just a shadow they project their beliefs onto? Or are they broken in a way you don't yet understand? Quirky tidbit. In some regions, cult leaders would instruct their followers to ask for punishment, claiming it showed loyalty or cleansed sins. Some even wrote hymns to pain. One scroll from southern France refers to torture as the fire kiss of the saints. Sevens. You'd laugh, but the image sticks. You think about that man. His calm. His certainty. His smile. You think about how your hands shook afterward, not from fear, but from confusion. Because if pain is a punishment, you know your place. But if pain is a gift, then what are you? You check the tools. They feel the same. Cold. Heavy. Familiar. But something's changed. Not in them. In you. Because now, when someone enters the chamber with a smile, you flinch. Not because of what you're about to do, but because you're afraid they might want it. You think about quitting again. You always do after sessions like that. The ones that mess with your head more than your hands. You sit in your chamber, door bolted, the air still vibrating with echoes of prayers and pain, and you think, this is it. I'm done. I'm walking away. But that thought never survives past nightfall, because quitting isn't really an option. You tried once. You remember it clearly. You packed what little you owned, some coin, a shirt that didn't smell like charcoal and blood, and a small wooden carving you couldn't remember carving. You made it halfway to the next town before a rider caught up with you. Said you were needed back for a special case. Sevens. You knew what that meant. You went back. Not because you wanted to. Because you understood. You don't leave this job. Not alive, anyway. They say you know too much. Not secrets. Not names. Just methods. Truths. Things people aren't supposed to see, let alone understand. Things that can't be unlearned. Historians still argue whether torturers were bound to lifelong service, or if they simply had nowhere else to go. Some records show contracts, 10 years, renewable. Others suggest it was more like a trap. Once you start, no one will ever trust you again outside of pain. You wonder who's more trapped, you or the people you question. You tried faking illness once. Stumbled into the magistrate's office coughing, pale, muttering something about a wasting sickness. He smiled politely. Then had a cleric bless your chamber for your recovery. The next morning, they brought in 3 suspects. One of them vomited blood. No one batted an eye. You got the message. One day, a man you barely recognise corners you by the baker's stall. Says his son's been arrested. Says he heard what you did. That you showed mercy once. That maybe you're not like the others. He offers you a bribe. Not for a confession, for silence. Says he doesn't care what his son did. Just doesn't want him to end up like the others. Sevens, you refuse. Not because you're loyal, because you know how that story ends. He disappears 2 days later. No record. No body. Just gone. And now there's a new warning in the air. Not just don't leave, but don't sympathise. You're a weapon. That's all they want you to be. Quirky tidbit. In certain cities, torturers were barred from owning land or running shops. Not to punish them, but to keep them mobile. No roots meant no excuses. No ties meant no conflict of interest. You were supposed to exist only in the cracks of society, never in it. You start noticing the little ways they isolate you. The guards don't chat anymore. The cook shortens your portions. The priest avoids eye contact, even during blessings. It's not hatred, not fear. It's a quiet disowning, as if they know you're already halfway gone. You try writing a letter, to no one in particular. Just a few lines about dreams, about silence, about how heavy everything feels. You burn it the same night. You once knew a man who did escape, got all the way to the coast, changed his name, worked as a fisherman, lived quiet. But then a flood wiped out half the town, and people got desperate. They started looking for scapegoats. His name came up. You know he used to torture people, right? Sevens. They strung him up with fishing nets. Said he brought the flood. Your hands are calloused. Your eyes always tired. Your shoulders ache like old wood. You dream of walking into the forest and never coming back. But even the trees would recognise you. Even the animals would sense what you've done. So you stay. You sharpen your tools. You clean the chains. You scrub the walls until your fingers split, not because it helps, but because it feels like penance. And when they bring in the next one, eyes wide, hands shaking, you meet their gaze with a blank face and say the same line you always do. Sevens. This can go quickly. All I need is the truth. Sevens. But the truth is, sevens. You can't leave. You were sentenced to this job the moment you accepted it. And every confession you've extracted since has just tightened your own rope a little more. You step outside for the first time in 3 days. The sun stabs your eyes like hot pins. The breeze feels fake, too clean, too bright, too alive. You pull your hood lower and trudge toward the edge of town. You're not here for a walk. You need supplies, soap, rope, maybe bread, if the baker still pretends not to recognise you. But before you even reach the market, the reactions begin. Children scatter. The dog barks from behind a fence, snarling like you kicked it in a past life. 2 women cross themselves and turn the other way. And you? You keep your head down, moving like a ghost that forgot how to haunt. You're the town's shadow now. Not a person. A warning. It wasn't always this bad. You remember a time, years ago, maybe, when you'd nod to the cobbler or joke with the brewer. They didn't like you, but they tolerated you. Now, you might as well have horns. Someone once told you dogs can sense guilt. Or maybe fear. Either way, they don't like you anymore. Even the mangy mutts that roam the alleys lower their heads when you pass. You tried feeding one once. It took the meat and ran, then threw it up 3 feet away. Kids are worse. They don't even pretend. They whisper behind barrels. They chant your name like it's part of a game. Torturer, torturer, don't look back. He'll put you on the stretching rack. One time, a boy threw a dead mouse at your door. Another time, someone scratched murderer into your chamber wall. You tried cleaning it. It came back. Deeper. Historians still argue whether torturers were feared as individuals or treated as cursed icons, unwelcome reminders of a broken justice system. Most evidence suggests they were tolerated only as long as they stayed silent, hidden, and useful. You're all 3, but that doesn't stop the stares. You once passed by a wedding feast. Laughter, music, bread, dancing. You paused for half a second, just to listen. The father of the bride spotted you. Didn't say a word. Just stepped forward and slammed the gate shut. You turned around without a word. The next day, someone dumped a basket of spoiled onions outside your chamber door. You didn't touch them. Just sat beside them, breathing in the rot. Felt appropriate. Quirky tidbit. In some towns, torturers weren't allowed to walk the main road. They had to take alleys, back paths, or even underground tunnels. One Italian torturer supposedly dug a hidden route from his home to the prison, just to avoid sunlight and slander. You've thought about it. But what's the point? The town may shun you, but it will never forget you. They remember your eyes, your voice, your pace. They've memorized you like a bad story told too many times. Your own family? Drifted away. Slowly, at first. Visits grew shorter. Letters stopped coming. Your sister's last message was a single line. Please don't write again. The neighbours ask questions. 7s. You haven't replied. You wouldn't know what to say. You tried once, years ago, to sit by the well and listen to gossip. You thought, maybe if you looked normal, if you just sat, they'd see you differently. Someone called for the guards. Said they felt threatened. You hadn't moved. You never sat there again. Now, when you need supplies, you leave coin in a jar at the door. The merchant leaves the goods in a basket outside your chamber. No words exchanged. No eyes met. You miss eye contact. You miss being seen. Now, even the mirror avoids you. Cracks run across the glass like spider legs. You threw a cloth over it months ago. No reason to look anymore. Because the man staring back isn't really a man anymore. He's something people whisper about. Something that smells like rust and smoke. Something that makes dogs growl and children cry. You finish your errands. 3 items. No conversation. Just heavy silence and the click of boots on cobblestone. You return to your chamber, close the door, and breathe. Here, no one looks at you. Here, the tools don't judge. And here, finally, you can forget. just for a moment, that you are the thing this town fears most. They're still there when you get home, your family. Technically. Your wife moves through the house like a ghost that forgot it used to laugh. She stirs the stew, feeds the chickens, closes the shutters, without once meeting your eye. You could be a passing spirit for all the warmth you get. The children, your children, avoid you like the plague. One hides behind the stove when you walk in. The other stares blankly through you like you're the blank wall where a window should be. You try to smile. They flinch. You don't blame them. Once, your youngest asked what you do. Just once. You said, "I work for the court." Sevens. That was enough. They've heard the whispers, seen the looks. They know which house other kids aren't allowed to visit. They've learned that silence is safer than questions. You sit at the table. The stew is hot, tasteless. Your wife doesn't speak. She hasn't spoken at dinner in months. Not since that night someone nailed a pig's foot to your door. She cleaned it off without a word. You thank her. She nods. That's your marriage now. Nods and half-eaten meals. You used to be in love. You remember that. Barely. Before the job. Before the shadows crawled into your skin. You told her you'd be working with criminal proceedings. She believed you. She doesn't ask anymore. Doesn't want to know. Historians still argue whether torturers were permitted to have families, or if most were shunned into isolation. Some accounts describe wives leaving within weeks of their husband's appointment. Others hint at forced marriages to prevent them from getting too lonely. You wonder which category you fall into. Sometimes you try. You bring home bread. Say something gentle. Offer to fix a leak in the roof. But the tension never leaves the room. You're not a husband. You're a warning. The neighbours don't talk to your family either. The kids get skipped when fruit is passed around at market. Your wife has to beg the miller to grind their grain, and even then, he mumbles about bad luck dust. Sevens. You've given them this life. No one says it, but it hangs in the air like old smoke. One night, you hear crying. Not screaming, just soft, steady weeping behind the children's room door. You listen. You don't knock. What would you even say? You sit in the dark, staring at the dying fire, and think, they deserve better, but they're stuck, just like you. Quirky tidbit. In some parts of Europe, torturers were only allowed to marry within their own class. Other torturers, executioners, gravediggers, no outsiders, no chance of dragging decent folk down into their pit of doom. You try to imagine being married to someone like Otmar. You shudder. Still, you're not cruel at home. You don't yell. You don't raise your hand. You try to be gentle, even if your voice always sounds like it's echoing from the bottom of a well. But your presence poisons the walls. No matter how quiet you walk, the floorboards creak louder under your boots. No matter how carefully you close the door, it always bangs in their ears. One night, your wife finally speaks. I want to take the children to my sister's for a while. Sevens. You nod. Of course. You don't ask when she'll be back. You don't expect her to. They leave the next morning. The house feels lighter, quieter, emptier. You eat alone, sleep alone, wake alone, and for a moment it almost feels like peace. But then the silence gets too loud. The stew grows cold on the stove because you forgot to eat. You find yourself talking to the kettle, to the fire, to Oswald, who's now fat and shameless. You thought you hated being the pariah. Turns out, loneliness has more teeth than gossip. You light a candle by the window, not because anyone will see it, just so you don't forget what warmth looked like. Then you go back to the chamber, because no one else will, and because there's no one left waiting at home. You dream of fire now. Not the controlled flicker of the brazier in your chamber. Not the branding irons or the candles that gutter in the wind. Big fire. A wall of it. A pyre reaching to the sky. Screams caught in the smoke. Eyes staring through flame until the lashes melt and the skin goes grey. You wake up choking, hands clutching your throat like something invisible still pressing down. You sit up, sweat-soaked, cold, alone, and every night it's the same. Not one victim, not one moment. Just the whole thing burning, you burning. You don't know if it's fear or prophecy, maybe both. The priests talk about hell. They say it's hot. Endless. Punishment for sins stacked too high to bury. But what they never mention is how familiar it feels when it shows up in your dreams. And you've got a front row seat. You've started keeping a candle lit at night. Not for light. For insurance. Superstition. Whatever makes the dark feel less thick. You sit and watch it for hours. You don't remember falling asleep. You just blink, and it's morning. That's your rhythm now. The waking world isn't much better. Today, they hang someone for heresy. You're not involved directly, but they still ask you to prepare him. You know what that means. A few cracked ribs. A confession on record. Make sure he dies in shame, not silence. He's old, thin, eyes like wet ash. Doesn't resist. You work on autopilot. At the end, he whispers, it won't end with me. Sevens. You believe him. You watch the hanging from behind the curtain. The crowd cheers. The rope snaps tight. A few people clap. One boy vomits. The priest says the soul is now in judgment. But you know better. The judgment already happened, in your chamber. Historians still argue whether torturers feared divine punishment or rationalised their role as just a job. Some tried to confess regularly, to reset their souls. Others never set foot in a church again. One left behind a note reading, I was doing God's work. I hope he was watching. Sevens. You don't go to church anymore. Not because you've turned against God, but because you're not sure you deserve to be there. You tried once. Slipped in during a weekday mass, sat in the back. No one noticed at first. Then a woman turned, saw you, and gasped. Moved her child away like you were dripping acid. You left before the bread was broken. Now, you pray only in your mind. Quiet, blunt prayers. No poetry. Please let me sleep. Please let them die fast. Please let me out. But there's no sign. No peace. Just that constant burn in your chest that no wine can extinguish. You remember the stories, how people said torturers went to a special kind of hell. Not because they sinned more, but because they sinned professionally. With routine. With precision. Like a craftsman with a chisel. You know your tools by feel now. The ridges. The worn grips. Which ones creak when picked up? You could grab the ankle clamp in the dark. You've done it in the dark. And maybe that's the problem. You're not just good at this. You're natural. Quirky tidbit. There's an old superstition in parts of Germany that torturers had to be buried face down, so their souls wouldn't claw their way back to the surface. One torturer supposedly cursed his whole town from the grave. Crops failed. Livestock miscarried. People swore they heard chains dragging at night. You'd laugh, but lately you don't discount anything. You keep smelling smoke where there isn't any. Ash in the air. Your food tastes burnt. Even water tastes like it passed through flame before reaching your lips. You wake with soot under your nails and don't remember touching the fire. Maybe it's stress. Maybe it's guilt. Or maybe the fire you've been stoking for others has finally found a way to light you up from the inside. They say everyone burns in the end, but no one ever tells you what happens to the ones who carried the torch. You don't remember when you stopped using your name. It's still there, buried in some old document, scrawled across the top of your first assignment. But no one says it. Not the guards. Not the magistrate. Not even your wife, back when she still spoke to you. Now, they call you Master of Pain. The Extractor. Him. Or sometimes, just nothing at all. A glance. A gesture. The way someone steps aside like your shadow could stain their boots. You used to correct people. You used to say, "I'm just doing my job." Now you barely speak. And when you do, it's only to the ones tied down, eyes wide, waiting for your next question. You've become a rumour, a bedtime threat, a figure in the mist. Kids say your name 3 times into a puddle and run screaming. Adults say it only when they think you're not around. But you're always around. That's the thing about people like you. When you're not visible, you're even more terrifying. Your chamber creaks when you're asleep. The brazier never cools completely. Even the tools seem to hum with memory, like they're continuing the work without you. You are a man, but barely. Mostly your function now. You used to keep count of names, of confessions, of sins squeezed out drop by drop. But the numbers blurred years ago. Now, it's just impressions. Voices. Scars on your hands that don't match your own body. You see them on the street sometimes. People you worked on who survived. They limp or flinch at sudden sounds, or cross themselves when they pass the courthouse. They never meet your gaze, but they feel you. And maybe that's worse than hate. Historians still argue whether torturers internalized their identity or simply faded into it. Did they become something else by choice, or because the role offered no room to be human? You've stopped wondering. This morning, someone slipped a note under your door. No wax seal, just a folded scrap with one word. Sevens, soon. Sevens. You don't know who left it, or why. Could be a threat, a confession, a plea. Could be someone inside the courthouse who knows too much, or a villager who's finally had enough. You sit in your chamber holding the note, letting the word echo. Soon. Does it mean your death? Your freedom? Or something darker? You don't know. You don't care. You get up. Pull on your coat. Strap the leather apron around your waist. Light the brazier. Sharpen the blade that dulls the fastest. The door creaks open. Another soul enters. Another voice waiting to be broken. You say the line. This can go quickly. All I need is the truth. Sevens. And in that moment, you become what they need you to be. Not a man. Not a monster. Just the thing they fear. Just the shape behind the pain. Just the whisper in the hallway that everyone hears, but no one dares follow. And soon, yes, soon, someone will come for you. But until then, you keep doing the work. Because someone has to. Because you are the ending to their stories. And because there's no ending left for you. The chamber is quiet now. The brazier's gone cold. The chains don't rattle anymore. Even the walls, usually alive with creaks and whispers, have fallen still. You sit there alone, not working. Just breathing. Slowly. Each breath a little deeper, a little softer than the last. Outside, the town sleeps. And for once, there are no footsteps in the hall. No screams. No commands. Just the hush of night settling over stone. You lean back against the wall, let your eyes close, and for the first time in what feels like years, there's no weight on your shoulders. No mask to wear. No confession to force from someone's trembling lips. Just silence. And that silence isn't empty. It's full of things long buried. Memories of laughter. Of warmth. Of hands that once held without shaking. Of faces you haven't seen in years. Some still living. Some long gone. You let them pass through you like wind through trees. You remember what your name sounds like. You remember what it felt like to be someone else. And maybe, just maybe, you believe there's still a sliver of that person left inside you. Deep down, waiting. The candle flickers. The shadows stretch. And as you breathe out one last time tonight, you let go. Not of guilt, not of sorrow, but of the need to be anything but still. Now, rest easy. The story's done. The night is yours. And the tools, they can wait until morning. End of script. Sweet dreams.